Here he tries to allege that the unchanged essentially corrupted the text of the Torah or allowed mistakes to creep into it by abusing the words of the Radak in his parish to Sefer Shmuel. Here he specifically tries to hide the fact that the Radak here is talking about the Kerei and Ksiv. The Kerei and Ksiv are the method in which Soferim, or Scribes, would transmit grammatical meanings of certain words, preserve certain readings given to different groups of people, like the 13 different scrolls made by Moshe Rabbeinu for the 12 different Scribes and one for the Ark, the vocalization of the Torah's words, and include other textual precisions to insert Dasa Torah and nuances within the Torah were not being lost. In his attempt to conceal the discussion of the Radak regarding the Kerei and Ksiv, he purposely doesn't include the translation of the first line, which is as follows: Im Ksiv v'loi Qerei v'inyan nechod im Qerei v'loi Qerei v'amolas ha'ele d'chsiven v'loi koiren or d'koiren v'loi chsiven. Meaning, if Ksiv, which is written, instead of Qerei, which is read, and the matter is one, if Qerei or not Qerei, these are words which are of the written and not of the read, or of the read and not of the written. May I repeat again that Kerei and Ksiv are not scribal changes to perceived, quote, errors in a text, but rather a method of preservation of the text itself, its grammatical meaning, its nuances, its spelling, and many more matters in relation to textual transmission of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. If we did not have Kerei and Ksiv, we would actually have lost a great deal of scribal history of the Torah as well as the nuances of the text. The fact that Kerei and Ksiv are verified throughout the history of the Jewish people, including the writing of the first 13 scrolls at Sinai by Moshe Rabbeinu, shows the diligence of the transmission of the Torah by the Jewish people, as if there were no Kerei and Ksiv, we could not have seen the precise nature of the Chumash. I will leave a link to a video in the description that gives a good layout of the Kerei and Ksiv, which was actually left in Judaism Unveiled's replies, which he seemingly hand-waves in attempts to ignore by claiming to know what the Kerei and Ksiv are. We will demonstrate that he doesn't in a short moment. Now, before we do so, I would like to address the rest of the claim he brings regarding the parish of the Radak. We must first establish what the Radak means when he says Avdi Sforim v'netatayli, meaning the Sforim are lost and scattered. This refers to the fact that there were certain nuances in the text that were not so well known entirely to the people of the time of the unchanged. As the commentary of the Radak establishes, where their knowledge was not employed, referring to the knowledge of the unchanged, they wrote one and did not write it with vowels, or they wrote it in the margins. So we can discern from here that the scattering was not in reference to entire books, but rather to certain matters of Kerei and Ksiv. The specific matter that is being discussed here is whether or not a certain Qerei or a certain Ksiv should take precedence within the text during Kriyas Torah, meaning the reading of the Torah during Shabbos, Yom Tov, and other processions. Hence, in order to preserve both, they would follow the scribal method of making both the Qerei and Ksiv present within the scroll, one actually within the text, and other to the margin. This is the specific matter being referred to when it says, the sages that knew them were dead. The specific Dasa Torah, which was not so well known until the establishment of the unchanged, was not entire portions of the Messiah, but rather a certain few places of which there was a machloka, meaning a dispute on whether or not a Qerei should take precedence or a Ksiv should take precedence. We know as well that the loss of entire books or Dasa Torah is not the subject of the Radak's parish, as we see the Chumash itself, the Nevi'im, and the Ksivim are quoted multiple times throughout this Sforim of Ezra and Nehemiah. Hence, if it were referring to the scattering of the entire Sforim themselves, as opposed to the matter of which Kerei and Ksiv should take precedence in certain areas of the text, there would be no quotations or extensive knowledge, nor demonstration of the transmission of these works within the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, Daniel, Esther, etc. However, we see each of these things to be very prevalent within the text, and that the Radak very clearly specifies that the statement Abdi Sforim Netalteli is in reference to the aforementioned matter of Qerei and Ksiv, and not damaged transmission or general loss of the revelation and history given from each previous generation of the Jewish people. Keep in mind as well, this matter of Qerei and Ksiv was overseen by the unchanged, who are not random rabbis who lack divine inspiration as Judaism Unveiled attempts to make it appear, but a synod of 70 prophets and 40 of the best sages or scribes among the Jewish people at the time. Among them were Ezra, Nehemiah, Mordechai, Zerubbabel, Daniel, Haggai, and Zechariah, Malachi, and many more, who had imparted divine revelation and wisdom as well as received the Ruach Kodesh. Hence the Radak writes, V'helchi ba'am achai riv al pidasam, meaning, and they went with the majority according to their knowledge. This is in reference to the following of consensus among the sages, judges, elders, and prophets when it comes to discerning a matter as mentioned in Deuteronomy 17, where it is written, do not deviate from the judges or the Levitical priesthood either to the left or to the right. Hence we can see that there is actually zero issue with the matter at hand, even in relation to these nuances, as the actions of the unchanged were not only based in the well-established Messiah and the method it transmits in relation to the Kriyas Torah and Seferis, but also that their actions were divinely inspired due to the fact that they were prophets themselves. Now, after making certain matters of textual precedence in Qerei when it comes to Kerei and Ksiv appear as an entire destruction of the Messiah from Har Sinai onward, we then see that he attempts to make another matter of Kerei and Ksiv appear as a, quote, correction of a mistake in the Torah. He goes to Deuteronomy 5:10, where it says, mitzvoiso, in the Ksiv, meaning where it is written, or in the Qerei, meaning where it is read, it is mitzvoisui. He attempts to make this appear as a correction of a scribal mistake, when in reality it is something far from this notion. In diktik, which is the grammatical nuances of the Hebrew language, vav and yud are considered interchangeable letters, meaning a vav could be and is used in the place of a yud and vice versa in many situations. This is one of those cases which is present within the text. Now, because a sav in the word mitzvoiso has a comment under it, and not a choilamulai attached to it, which makes an oi sound, which would make the word mitzvoisoi instead of mitzvoiso, as well as because there is no yud between the vav and the sav within the word, which is the appropriate plural case when saying the word his commandments, which is mitzvoisuv. We see that this text is utilizing a Ksiv, where a vav is interchanged with a yud as opposed to some sort of spelling mistake. Hence the Qerei transmitted with the Kriyas HaTorah its mitzvoisui, meaning my commandments, while the Ksiv transmitted alongside the Ksivas HaTorah, or transcribing or writing of the Torah itself, is mitzvoiso. Ironically enough, the video sent to Judaism Unveiled in his replies actually addresses the case of a vav being interchanged with a yud, but he purposefully ignores this to allege that a case of Kerei and Ksiv is actually a spelling error, and replies with the ignorant phrase, quote, I know what Kerei and Ksiv are. Keep in mind, the equivalent accusation towards his religion from Protestant apologists online is alleging that the ahruf and kiraat of the Quran are variants and mistakes spread out within the work itself, as opposed to nuances in recitation meant for different Arabic groups. The only difference is that he would call a Protestant apologist who alleges such a thing dishonest, but not himself when he does the exact same thing to other faiths and religions. Keep in mind as well that the usage of, quote, his here would not have even been a mistake. In the Hebrew itself, it was actually saying the words his commandments, as we see that cases of individuals speaking in the first person occur within various parts of the TaNaKH, such as in Genesis 4 when TaNaKH says, quote, wives of TaNaKH, listen to my voice. It is hysterical that even without the presence of the absolute proof of Torah preservation, that is the system of Kerei and Ksiv, of which he is entirely ignorant, his claim would still be entirely incorrect. May I remind you all that you will continuously see a similarity between the method of this individual when it comes to the slander of the religion of Judaism and David Wood in his slander of his religion, Islam. Keep that in mind and you will see an entire curtain of arrogant stupidity unveil itself. Shalom Aleichem v'Rachmanas Hashem.